Hello and welcome to the next episode of Learn With Me Hydrasynth. This is episode 22, Sound Design Macro Drone. So first, what is Learn With Me? Learn With Me is a series where you get to follow my end-to-end process of learning to get the best out of a synthesizer. In this case, I've been working with the Ashen Sound Machine's Hydrasynth Explorer. This is the same engine as the 49 key and the Hydrasynth Deluxe Edition, but with a 37 mini key keyboard retaining polyphonic aftertouch. It's an 8-voice poly synthesizer with 3 oscillators, 2 of which have what are called mutants, which are audio effects applied to the oscillator and are quite unique to this synthesizer. In addition, there are quite a lot of modulation sources and a set of macro assignments, which can be controlled by these encoders on the panel, and a large mod matrix. So there is a lot of sound design potential here. And it is that sound design potential that we will be exploring. For the last few episodes, I've been designing some sounds rather than showcasing features. Today I shall design another. What I'm going to do is design a drone, but that drone is going to be controllable through a set of macros such that you could perform it. Now, I had a quick experiment making some drones and I found that most of the time was taken by setting up the correct macro assignments. So I'm going to rush through the initial sound design, so apologies if I'm a little bit more terse than I otherwise would be. First, I already know that I want to use wave scan, which is the wavetable mode of the synthesizer. What I'm doing is I'm offsetting the initial wave scan point so it's not right at the end, so as I can do a bidirectional modulation from there. I'm going to now go and select the wavetables. If I hold shift when I scroll, we are free to select any wave for any of the 8 entries in the wavetable. But what I would like to do is I'd like to select 8 related waves, because if the waves are not related, it can sound rather odd as we morph between them. So the first set I'm using is called Scorpio. The waveforms are known as Scorpio 1 through 8. And the other one I'm going to use is called Horizon. So we've got Horizon 1 to 8. So you can hear it's not a saw wave anymore, but we're not yet modulating. How are we going to modulate? Well, I'm going to use the LFOs primarily. So what I'm going to do is set up LFO 1 the way I like it, and then I'm going to copy that across. This should be a time saver. First, I like triangle wave, because I don't like hanging around at the expense of the modulation. I'm going to set the first one quite slow. 0.05 Hertz, that is 20 seconds per cycle. I also want the sync trigger off, so I don't want these LFOs to be re-triggering per voice. Now that looks okay, so I'm going to copy it. So hold save, 1 to 2, hold save, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. So now they all look the same, but what I'd like to change is the rates. I'm just going to set them a fraction faster each. So now we have all of them moving at different rates, and just to make sure that they're not in phase with one another, if I were to save this, I'm going to adjust the phase angle. The phase angle, I guess you can see from this image, is where in the waveform we begin. So I'm just going to offset them 5 degrees at a time. So 5, 10, 15, 20. I appreciate we've not heard any sound so far, which seems a little bit strange for a sound design, but we'll get to it. Next, I'm going to get a pulse width modulation called pulse width squeeze. So I've put those on both oscillator 1 and 2. Let me turn the oscillators up so we can at least hear what's going on here. Note that though I've made those LFOs, I haven't actually done anything with them. I know for sure I'm going to want a longer attack and release on this sound. In practice, I'm going to latch it. But unless I have this a little bit longer, it'll sound quite abrasive. Now I'm going to start with some of these modulations. So LFO 3, 4, and 5 I'm going to use to wave scan the first 2. So I'm going to do these assignments. And then this one will go here. And then I'm also going to use, let's say, 4 and 5 for the mutants. So I'm going to adjust the depth. So here, then, oscillator 1, I'm going to be adjusting wave scan. Oscillator 2, wave scan. Oscillator 3, I'm going to do some pitch drift because there are no mutants on here, and I don't have wave scan available on oscillator 3. It's a sub-oscillator in this case. I'm going to be adjusting the depth of these mutants. So I'm just going to set something fairly arbitrary here. Let's set this positive 25, negative 25, negative 20, positive 20. These are pretty arbitrary numbers, and this can be, oops, let's see, that's pitch, sorry, that should be much smaller than that. Let's say -1, this can be -15, this can be, okay, anyway. So now we have some motion going. Now I'm going to add some ring mod. I'm going to solo this just so I can hear it clearly. I'm going to ring mod the output of the mutants 1 and 3. I want this to be quiet. This is just going to be some sort of background texture. And then I'm also going to solo the noise, and I'm going to let's just use the pink noise. The main reason that I'm using the pink noise is the next thing I'm going to do is for the filters. Firstly, I want them both tracking because I'm going to be using both of them. The tracking may not be that important in the end because this is probably going to be a unison patch, but it's useful to have them track. And the other thing I would like is parallel routing. So I'm going to be sending audio to both filters simultaneously. This will not have done anything initially because the default filter routings are 100% all to filter 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make oscillator 2 go 75% to filter 1. I'm going to make oscillator 3 go 50-50, and I'm going to make the other sources also 50-50. So the reason that I'm doing this is I intend to modulate oscillator 1 over into the other filter, and oscillator 2 partially over to the other filter. So that's going to be one of my macro controls here. Now I've got those in place, I would probably like to set the filter so it sounds reasonable to me. So first, I like the 12 dB filter, but I prefer the fat option here, which means when I turn up the resonance, I'm not going to lose bass. Filter 2 is in the low pass, band pass, high pass morphing mode. The morph number is maximum, which means it is high pass at the moment, so that's good. So let's listen to filter 1, and I'm going to close it up. Since I would like the macros probably to brighten the sound, I'm going to close this more than I think. Let me listen to resonance. A little bit of drive. Let's go for filter 2. That's not what I meant to do. Filter 2. Bit of resonance. So what I've done is I've swept the filter so it's a little bit more towards band pass. Again, that's a modulation that I hope to be using in future. So we have something that has a bit of a droney character to it, but as I mentioned, I'd like to be using unison. Another thing I want is I'm going to turn on warm mode, which is a bit like a tilt EQ. Random phase, meaning that the oscillators won't start precisely in phase with each other. I'm going to turn up the width a bit, let's say that's 50% of the way, because I'm going to be using the delay and the reverb to add a little bit of width to the sound, and I'm going to use some of this analog flavor. First, I'm going to turn on unison. I'm going to set the depth up to 8, which is maximum depth. All 8 voices will follow one note. And now I'm going to detune them. I'm only detuning them a little because I'm thinking that a macro is going to adjust that detune a little more. Now I'm going to adjust the analog flavor, which will adjust the relative tuning of the oscillators and the voices and other parameters. Sounding good. Other parameters in here, even though I probably won't be doing this, I'm not really going to want vibrato, nor am I going to use the pitch bend wheel to bend the pitch. So I've set both of those amounts to 0. That means that these controls are now available to me as modulation controls if I wish. Moving on, I definitely want glide on, and I want a very long glide time. Well, let's say 120. Let's just try it. Maybe even a bit longer than that. Sounds good to me. So we have a nice glide, so that's another performance possibility that I have. Even though I'll be latching, I can have the whole sound move up or down the spectrum. Now I'm going to dive into the effects, and then hopefully I'm going to leave myself enough time to add some macros. First, effects. One of the things I was thinking about is this lo-fi effect. I can actually use it as a filter. So what I'm going to do is make it 100% wet. I'm going to turn the resonance as low as it goes, turn the filter cutoff as high as it goes, turn the sample rate to the native sample rate so there's no sample rate reduction, and then select the filter type clean. Clean is not actually the cleanest of filters, low is a cleaner filter, but clean has a little bit of coloration, which I think makes sense here. So now let's play a note, and now I'm going to turn the cutoff, which is going to act as a low pass filter. Maybe I'll add a little resonance. Okay, so now you can hear that I've darkened the sound, and I think that's something that I'm going to do in a few places. I'm going to look to darken the sound so as the macros can brighten it up. Next, some delay. I'm going to use the LCR delay because I want quite a lot of stereo motion going on here, just some additional interest. My thinking is I'm going to have the delay be quite bright, and then the reverb is going to be dark. So now you can hear the delays are in the higher ends. The feedback tone adjusts how much of that applies to the fed back sound as well as just the wet signal. Hearing that noise, I'm quite tempted to modulate that. I'd like to modulate it very slowly, but I think I'm going to use LFO1 for the filter, LFO2 for the other filter, so I'm going to need another modulation source. Maybe I'll put those modulations in place now while I remember them. So filter 1, I can just add some LFO amount, let's say 2.5. LFO2, I'm going to modulate the cutoff amount, and it can be minus 2.5. So now I have a little bit of filter motion going on here. Okay, and I can go back to these effects. And what I was talking about for this delay, I think modifying the delay time might be nice, and it might also be nice to modify the reverb time. And the way I'm going to do that then is I'm going to use an envelope as a cycling source. So I want it to be quite long. So the other one, the longest one was about 20 seconds, wasn't it? So let's set this up to 12 seconds rise, 12 seconds fall. So this is going to be 24 seconds. It's going to be even longer in phase than this. But I want this to be like a triangle. So I'm going to set these to be linear. So this is going to look like a triangle wave. Additionally, I want the envelope to loop indefinitely, and I want it to free run. So this is now like an LFO triangle wave. Note that it will not be a bipolar modulation. This is a unipolar modulation. It's just worth being aware. I may as well copy this. So now I have 3 of these, but these other ones I can make them slower. So let's take this up to 13 seconds. This one can go up to 14 seconds. So we have 3 different envelopes all running at slightly different rates. By default, these things are going to be triggered when I play the note, which I think is acceptable for these purposes, so I'm not going to make any changes to that. What I'm going to do with this then is I'm going to modulate the delay time, and another one's going to modulate the reverb time. But first, I will put the reverb in place. Let's listen to the delay and let's set the wet dry. So I think I'm going to make the delay quite present here. Now for the reverb, I think the reverb can be big, but I want it to be dark. So I've turned the tone down and I've damped more of the high end. Sounding pretty good. So I think then what I'm going to do is I'm going to modulate the reverb time and I'm going to modulate the delay time. So let's say I'm going to use envelope 3, which is the fastest of these 3, even though it's slow, to modulate the time a little bit. It can probably be a reasonable modulation. And oh, that was supposed to be reverb. This reverb time. So this gives us a little bit of pitch shift that goes on in the reverb tails and the delay tails. Finally, the last effect, I think I'm going to put an EQ here. Should I? I will. I'm thinking I've also got my mixer here, but this gets me sweep the bands. So what I'm going to do is, in order to listen to where I would like to set the high crossover, I'm going to play with the other bands turned down. So now I've just captured that fizz in the high ends. A little more. And now I'm going to turn this down, and I'm going to turn up the low, and now I'm going to and now I can go through and adjust these all to whatever I consider to be reasonable levels. So I think what I might do is have this tilted a bit. So that's to say the low gain is high and the high gain is low. Note that when you are modulating these pre and post effects, you only have access to the wet dry and the parameters on the first page. So I can't actually modulate these cutoffs. I can only modulate the high gain and the low gain. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt this so we get a different shape coming out of it. I may also adjust these. So as you make the pulse narrower, the pulse width narrower, you get a sort of brighter, sharper tone. So I'm making the depth lesser here, so as when I modulate it, I can modulate it upwards to make the tone brighter. So one of my macros will be a brightening effect. Okay. So I'm just going to latch that, and now I'm going to actually get on to doing the macros. So my first macro, I mentioned brightening, so I think that's what I'm going to do. So the ways that I'm going to brighten, I'm just going to pick some sources here. Many of them. So the first is LFO1, I'm going to wave scan it. LFO2, I'm going to also wave scan it. Mutant 1, I'm going to adjust the depth. Mutant 2, I'm going to adjust the depth. Oh, sorry, this was supposed to be pre-effect. So now let's go through and adjust these parameters. I can use this knob to set the depth of that macro. So that macro is now applied at full level. So anything I do here will hear in real time. Oops, Mutant 3 is supposed to be adjusting depth. So this is the cutoff. Parameter 1 is the cutoff of the lo-fi effects. So another thing to brighten, maybe I'll open the cutoff a little bit here. And now let's pick a name. And an obvious name for this, which is brightening the sound, would be brighten. So that's brightening the sound. Let's think of another set of adjustments we can make. I think it might be interesting to have something which adjusts the resonance here. And maybe it brings in some noise and maybe ring mod. So let's go macro assignment, macro 2. So first thing I said was resonance. Next thing is bring in ring mod and noise. And maybe I'll bring in some resonance here as well. Let's go back. Filter 1. I wanted to adjust resonance. Filter 2. Also resonance. Mixer level for let's bring in the ring mod and oscillator 3, but not the noise. And then this one. What are the parameters here? Let's have a look. Resonance is the second parameter, so let's... So. Resonance as well. So what I might do is I might close that filter a little bit. And I might morph this filter a little bit more towards low pass. So let's listen to that, let's animate it. Let's see what turning up the drive does here. So what I'm tempted to do is actually to turn down the drive. So this brings us more towards something which is ringing instead of buzzing. So let's see if there's anything called ring. If not, I may have to even type it. Okay, it says ring mod. So I'm just going to change that to say. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is leave these parameters both at the sort of 50% level when I set up the next macro. The next macro, I quite like the idea, I'm going to turn this down a little bit for now, of adjusting this delay and reverb balance, and maybe adjust this post effect a little bit, and maybe even the wet dry of this. So let's just try that out. So first, first delay, reverb, post effects, pre-effects. So the pre-effect, I want to adjust wet dry on. Post effect, I'm going to adjust the high and the low end like I did on that other one. Reverb, I'm going to adjust wet dry, and delay, I'm going to adjust wet dry. So specifically, I'm thinking, set this to maximum. So turning the wet dry up on the reverb is making this louder. So let's see, first I've got the pre-effect wet dry. I'm going to see what happens if I turn this down. So now we got a bit more full frequency coming through, but this is all getting rather loud. This last post effect, that's the low end. So what I'm going to do, I think, is turn down the high end a little bit. And then finally, because this is getting louder, I'm going to maybe do two things. First, I will turn down the drive. And second, I will turn down the amp. So this is amplifier level. To me, this sounds like it's adjusting the width. So let me see if there is something called width here. Okay, 3 parameters. So I'm going to turn this to around 50%, just so I have some context for setting the final macro. The last one, I don't really know what I'm going to do with it, so let's go to town and experiment a little bit. Macro edit. So what might we like to do? One thing I think might be interesting is turning that morph quite far down, bringing the cutoff up here, and bringing this cutoff down. Okay, so that's quite nice. I quite like the way that's cleaned the tone up. Another thing that I might do then is adjust the pre-effect. Open the cutoff a little bit on this pre-effect, and in the post-effect, I think I will the low end. Cut a little low end. Bring up a little high end. And I think I'm going to bring some noise in. So, noise level. So this I think of as sort of fizz that's coming in. Let's listen. Not a tremendous change in volume, which is good. So I think fizz is what I would like to call this. Let's see if there's something called fizz in here already. Okay, let's edit the name. I Z Z. So So one thing you may note that I haven't really set here is the button value for these parameters. The button value is 0 for all of them, which is the default. What the button value is, it means that when I press the button, that is the value that that parameter will jump to. So they all have a default of 0. So let's just listen to each of these and decide if there's anything we need to change. That's pretty nice to me. Let's try this one. Sounds pretty good too. Sounds good. Final one. Okay, so that fizz sound is really getting it loud. So, thing to do here is amplify a level. Let's see if we have any basses left here for any other interesting modulations. Well, I just noticed that I didn't actually use the filter panning that I was thinking of doing, so also I'm going to do some stereo panning here, just static. Okay, so the voices are panned out. So since I'm not animating these, if I was going to spend more time, I might animate these parameters. I might also do some animation of stereo motion, but I'm not spending too long. So final thing that I'll do here then is set an EQ on my mixer and hopefully do a very quick performance so you can hear how this sounds. So what I'll do is I'll turn I'll make this envelope a bit longer. Yep. So what I'm letting it do is I'm letting that pitch go all the way down, so as when I begin, as the envelope opens, we'll get this upward sweep. So yeah, let's close these all, and I shall do a quick performance, and then we shall be done for the day. Okay, so that was a very quick example of what you could do with this patch. You can see that my choice of macros here was fairly arbitrary. My sound design of the patch was done pretty formulaically. Imagine if I spent the time here to fine-tune these parameters to get things sounding just the way I wanted. Not just to use triangle LFOs, but to use step LFOs and other sorts of modulations. To actually design these macros to have very specific sonic effects. Consider also that I'm only using 4 because there are only 4 encoders, but there are actually 8 macros, each of which can take 8 effect slots. Additionally, macros can adjust other macros, and mod slots can adjust macros, and macros can adjust mod slots. So there is a whole slew of possibilities for complicated sound design for making interesting effects here. I could imagine being able to do a complete, fairly extended drone/ambient set on a single patch with carefully designed macros, so I think that speaks to the power of the synthesizer. I think that's all I want to talk about today. And I think most probably I'm only going to do one more sound design demonstration. I'm not sure exactly how long that's going to take, so it may be the case that that actually spans 2 episodes. So there's probably 1 or 2 more episodes of this series, but we are drawing it to a close. So I hope that you have enjoyed the series so far. I hope you've enjoyed seeing my process in using this synthesizer, and I hope that's been useful to you. But most importantly, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me today, and goodbye.